Any day now. Hey, that was fast. We're live. Hi, I'm Ishta Mercurio, and it's been a while since I've read anything online. I'm sorry about that. I was reading Bleak House by Charles Dickens, and I'm still reading Bleak House by Charles Dickens. And what happened was that a couple weeks ago, I came online in the middle of the night, as I always do, to read chapter 6. And I turned on the computer and I got all set up and I got reading. And unbeknownst to me, it stopped recording after 17 minutes. The Wi Fi glitched out and I didn't notice the alarm notification in the corner of the screen. And so it dropped the live stream. And so, I read for 47 minutes and only the first 17 minutes of that was captured, which, as you can imagine, was not my favorite thing. So I tried again a few days later and again a few days later, and the Wi Fi kept glitching out. So I'm making a couple changes. We're doing an experiment today where I'm actually recording this, as you can see, not in the middle of the night. It's still daytime. But and the lighting is kind of funky. It's 5:40 something in the evening, and so the light coming through the window isn't the best quality light. It's late, so I've got like the bluish light from the computer, and then I've got the, you know, kind of palish light from outside, and this extremely bright yellow lamp in the corner that I almost knocked over just now. So that's a fun time. Maybe this is appropriate for Bleak House. Maybe I should record all my streams at 5:45 in the evening. Anyway, the point is I'm scheduling this to actually show up tonight at 10. And I'm hoping that tonight at 10, if we can make that a regular thing, that I record it during the day when the Wi-Fi isn't so glitchy, and then it shows up at 10, and then I'm hoping that will work better, and I won't have any more moments of doing almost an hour's worth of reading and having most of it not count for anything because the Wi-Fi glitches out and drops the feed. So here we are with Bleak House at the beginning of chapter 6. Our narrator, I believe, is about to arrive at Bleak House. They've just left an inn on the way there. And chapter 6 is quite long, so I'm only going to read, and it is Mother's Day. I do have Mother's Day things to do. So I'm only going to read the first half or so, and I'll read the second half of the chapter tomorrow. And hopefully this will work out, and you'll all be able to see it and hear it and enjoy it, and that'll go a lot better. Chapter 6, Quite at Home. The day had brightened very much, and still brightened as we went westward. We went our way through the sunshine and the fresh air, wondering more and more at the extent of the streets, the brilliancy of the shops, the great traffic, and the crowds of people whom the pleasanter weather had seemed to have brought out like many-coloured flowers. By and by, we began to leave the wonderful city, and to proceed through suburbs which, of themselves, would have made a pretty large town in my eyes. And at last we got into a real country road again, with windmills, rickyards, milestones, farmers' wagons, scents of old hay, swinging signs and horse troughs, trees, fields, and hedgerows. It was delightful to see the green landscape before us, and the immense metropolis behind. And when a wagon with a train of beautiful horses, furnished with red trappings and clear-sounding bells, came by us to these bells, so cheerful were the influences around. "The whole road has been reminding me of my namesake Whittington," said Richard, "and that wagon is the finishing touch. Hello, what's the matter?" We had stopped, and the wagon had stopped too. Its music changed as the horses came to a stand, and subsided to a gentle tinkling, except when a horse tossed his head or shook himself, and sprinkled off a little shower of bell ringing. "Ah, our postilion is looking after the wagoner," said Richard. and the wagoner is coming back after us. Good day, friend. The wagoner was at our coach door. Why, here's an extraordinary thing, added Richard, looking closely at the man. He has got your name, Ada, in his hat. One to Richard, one to me. These the wagoner delivered to each of us respectively, reading the name aloud first. In answer to Richard's inquiry from whom they came, he briefly answered, Master, sir, if you please, and putting on his hat again, which was like a soft bowl, cracked his whip, he replied, Going to London. We opened. I look forward, my dear, to our meeting easily and without constraint on either side. I therefore have to propose that we meet as old friends and take the past for granted. It will be a relief to you, possibly. John Jarndyce. I had perhaps less reason to be surprised than either of my companions, having never yet enjoyed an opportunity of thanking one who had been my benefactor and sole earthly dependence through so many years. I had not considered how I could thank him, my gratitude lying too deep in my heart for that. But I now began to consider how I could meet him without thanking him. This revived in Richard and Ada a general impression that they both had, without quite knowing how they came by it, that their cousin Jarndyce could never bear acknowledgments for any kindness he warned, and that, sooner than receive any, he would resort to the most singular expedient. Ada dimly remembered to have heard her mother tell, when she was a very little child, that he had once done her an act of uncommon generosity, and that on her going to his house to thank him, he happened to see her through a window coming to the door, and immediately escaped by the back gate, and was not heard of for 3 months. This discourse led to a great deal more of the same theme, and indeed it lasted us all day, and we talked of scarcely anything else. If we did by any chance diverge into another subject, we soon returned to this, and wondered what the house would be like, and when we should get there, and whether we should see Mr. Jarndyce as soon as we arrived, or after a delay, and what he would say to us, and what we should say to him. All of which we wondered about over and over again. The roads were very heavy for the horses, but the pathway was generally good, so we alighted and walked up all the hills, and liked it so well that we prolonged our walk on the level ground when we got to the top. At Barnet there were other horses waiting for us, but as they had only just been fed, we had to wait for them too, and got a long fresh walk over a common and an old battlefield before the carriage came up. These delays so protracted the journey that the short day was spent, and the long night had closed in before we came to St. Albans, near to which town Bleak House was, we knew. By that time we were so anxious and nervous that even Richard confessed, as we rattled over the stones of the old street, to feeling an irrational desire to drive back again. As to Ada and me, whom he had wrapped up with great care, out of the town round a corner, and Richard told us that the postboy, who had for a long time sympathized with our heightened expectation, Richard holding Ada lest she should be jolted down, and gazed round upon the open country and the starlight night for our destination. There was a light sparkling on the top of a hill before us, and the driver, house, put his horses into a canter and took us forward at such a rate, uphill though it was, that the wheels sent the road drift flying about our heads like spray from a watermill. Lost it presently, saw it, and turned into an avenue of trees, and cantered up towards where it was beaming brightly. It was in an old-fashioned house, a circular sweep leading to the porch. A bell was rung as we drew up, and amidst the sound of its deep voice in the still air, and the distant barking of some dogs, and a gush of light from the opened door, and the smoking and steaming of the heated horses, and the quickened beating of our own hearts, we alighted in no inconsiderable confusion.
Ada, my love, Esther, my dear, you are welcome. I rejoice to see you. Rick, if I had a hand to spare at present, I would give it you.
The gentleman who said these words in a clear, bright, hospitable voice had one of his arms round Ada's waist and the other round mine, and kissed us both in a fatherly way, and bore us across the hall into a ruddy little room all on a sofa ready drawn out near the hearth. I felt that if we'd been at all demonstrative, he would have run away in a moment.
Now, Rick, said he, I have a hand at liberty. A word in earnest is as good as a speech. I'm heartily glad to see you. You are at home. Warm yourself.
Richard shook him by both hands with an intuitive mixture of respect and frankness, and only saying, though with an earnest disappearing,
You are very kind, sir. Wish to you.
laid aside his hat and coat, and came up to the fire.
And how did you like the ride? And how did you like Mrs. Jellyby, my dear?
Said Mr. Jarndyce to Ada. While Ada was speaking to him in reply, I glanced, I need not say with how much interest, at his face. It was a handsome, lively, quick face, full of change and motion, and his hair was a silvered iron grey. I took him to be nearer 60 than 50, but he was upright, hearty, and robust. From the moment of his first speaking to us, his voice had connected itself with an association in my mind that I could not define. But now, all at once, a something sudden in his manner and a pleasant expression in his eyes recalled the gentleman in the stagecoach 6 years ago, on the memorable day of my journey to Reading. I was certain it was he. I never was so frightened in my life as when I made the discovery, for he caught my glance, and appearing to read my thoughts, gave such a look at the door that I thought we'd lost him. However, I'm happy to say he remained where he was, and asked me what I thought of Mrs. Jellyby. She exerts herself very much for Africa, sir, I said.
Nobly, returned Mr. Jarndyce. But you answer like Ada, whom I had not heard.
I rather thought, said I, glancing at Richard and Ada, who entreated me with their eyes to speak, that perhaps you will remember that Mrs. Jellyby had this house that was just absolutely gone to ruin, gone to rack and ruin. It was filthy, and her children were filthy, and their clothes were tattered, and no one was fed well, and the fires weren't tended, and the fireplaces were, barely smoldering, let alone roaring with fire. So that's something of note. And I'll back up a bit. She exerts herself very much for Africa, sir, I said.
Nobly, returned Mr. Jarndyce. But you answer like Ada,
whom I had not heard.
You all think something else, I see. We rather thought, said I, glancing at Richard and Ada, who entreated me with their eyes to speak, that perhaps she was a little unmindful of her home. I want to know your real thoughts, my dear. I may have sent you there on purpose. We thought that perhaps, said I, of home, sir, and that perhaps while those are overlooked and neglected, no other duties can possibly be substituted for them. The little Jellybys, said Richard, coming to my relief, are really, I can't help expressing myself strongly, sir, in a devil of a state. She means well, said Mr. Jarndyce hastily. The wind's in the east. It was in the north, sir, as we came down, observed Richard. My dear Rick, said Mr. Jarndyce, poking the fire, I'll take an oath it's either in the east or going to be. I'm always conscious of an uncomfortable sensation now and then when the wind is blowing in the east. I believe it is. And so the little I had my doubts about 'em, are in a, oh, Lord, yes, it's easterly, said Mr. Jarndyce. He had taken 2 or 3 undecided turns up and down while uttering these broken sentences, retaining the poker in one hand and rubbing his hair with the other, with a good-natured vexation, at once so whimsical and so lovable that I'm sure we were more delighted with him than we could possibly have expressed in any words. He gave an arm to Ada and an arm to me, and, bidding Richard bring a candle, was leading the way out, when he suddenly turned us all back again. Those little Jellybys, didn't you? Now, if it had rained sugar plums or 3-cornered raspberry tarts or anything of that sort, said Mr. Jarndyce. Oh, cousin, Ada hastily began. Good, my pretty pet. I like cousin. Cousin John, perhaps, is better. Then cousin John, Ada laughingly began again. Ha, ha, very good indeed, said Mr. Jarndyce with great enjoyment. Sounds uncommonly natural. Yes, said Mr. Jarndyce. What did... Why, cousin John, said Ada, clasping her hands upon his arm and shaking her head at me across him, for I wanted her to be quiet. Esther was their friend directly. Esther nursed them, coaxed them to sleep, washed and dressed them, told them stories, kept them quiet, bought them keepsakes. My dear girl, oh, my dear girl, I'd only gone out with Peepy after he was found and given him a little tiny horse. And cousin John, she softened poor Caroline, the eldest one, so much, and was so thoughtful for me and so amiable. No, you know it's true. The warm-hearted darling leaned across her cousin John and kissed me, and then, looking up in his face, boldly said, At all events, cousin John, I will thank you for the companion you've given me. I felt as if she challenged him to run away, but he didn't. Where did you say the wind was, Rick? Asked Mr. Jarndyce. In the north, as we came down, sir. You are right. There's no east in it. Mistake of mine. Come, girls. Come and see your home. It was one of those delightfully irregular houses where you go up and down steps out of one room into another, and where you come upon more rooms when you think you've seen all there are, and where there is a bountiful provision of little halls and passages, and where you find still older cottage rooms in unexpected places with lattice windows and green growth pressing through them. Mine, which we entered first, was of this kind, with an up-and-down roof that had more corners in it than I ever counted afterwards, and a chimney. There was a wood fire on the hearth, paved all around with pure white tiles, in every one of which a bright miniature of the fire was blazing. Out of this room, you went down 2 steps into a charming little sitting room, looking down upon a flower garden which from these you came on Richard's room, which was part library, part sitting room, part bedroom, and seemed indeed a comfortable compound of many rooms. Out of that you went straight, with a little interval of passage, to the plain room where Mr. Jarndyce slept all year round, with his window open, his bedstead without any furniture standing in the middle of the floor for more air, and his cold bath gaping for him in a smaller room adjoining. Out of that you came into another passage where there were back stairs, and where you could hear the horses being rubbed down outside the stable and being told to hold up and get over, as they slipped about very much on the uneven stones. Or you might, if you came out at another door, every room had at least 2 doors, go straight down to the hall again by half a dozen steps and a low archway, wondering how you got back there, or had ever got out of it. The furniture, old-fashioned rather than old, like the house, was as pleasantly irregular. Ada's sleeping room was all flowers, in chintz and paper, in velvet, in needlework, in the brocade of 2 stiff courtly chairs which stood, each attended by a little page of a stool for greater state, on either side of the fireplace. Our sitting room was green, and had, framed and glazed upon the walls, numbers of surprising and surprised birds staring out of pictures at a real trout in a case, as brown and shiny as if it had been served with tea. At the death of Captain Cook, and at the whole process of preparing tea in China, as depicted by Chinese artists. In my room, there were oval engravings of the months, lady, all the movables, from the wardrobes to the chairs and tables, hangings, glasses, even to the pincushions and perfect neatness, the existence of a drawer, small or large, rendered it possible, of quantities of rose leaves and sweetmeat, such with its illuminated windows, softened here and there by shadows of curtains, and warmth and comfort, with its hospitable jingle at a distance of preparations for dinner, with the face of its generous master brightening everything we saw, and just wind enough without to sound a low accompaniment to everything we heard, were our first impressions of Bleak House. "I'm glad you like it," said Mr. Jarndyce when he'd brought us round again to Ada's sitting room. "It makes no pretensions, but it is a comfortable little place, I hope, and will be more so with such bright young looks in it. You've barely half an hour before dinner. There's no one here but the finest creature upon earth," pursued Mr. Jarndyce. "Not a child in years. He's grown up. He is at least as old as I am. This inaptitude for all worldly affairs. He is a perfect child." We felt that he must be very interesting. "He knows Mrs. Jellyby," said Mr. Jarndyce. "He's a musical man, an amateur, but might have been a professional. He is an artist. He is a man of attainments and of captivating manners. He has been unfortunate in his affairs, in his family, but he doesn't care. He's a child.